Hey, family. I'm Sharif Aman.
I'm Jenna Barbosa.
This is Love Speak Revolution.
Love meets you where you're at.
Yes, it does.
So we are here again.
Yes.
Guys, our mission is to revolutionize the idea that you have to have it all together to experience Jesus' love, no matter if you are a believer or not. Yeah. You just don't. No. You just don't have to have it together. Jesus loves you anyway.
Yes. Meet you right where you're at. Yes. Yeah, well, we are the third part of our 3-part series.
Yeah.
It's been really good. It's been heavy, but it's been really good. I feel like, we're in the ring with
boxing gloves on.
Tyson.
Yeah, it is. It's heavy is a good word for it. You know, we're talking about trauma. So our series is trauma series, and it really is, it's heavy because it just goes so layered. So our third episode, which is currently what we're in, we're talking about grief.
Yeah.
So we've covered trauma just in general, how it affects us, talked about the need to just take it head on and heal. And then we talked about addictions and how trauma can really cause addiction, and addiction can cause its own trauma, which causes its own and just kind of perpetuates that cycle. So we're going to talk today about just grief, because trauma has so much, grief, and trauma causes grief. We grieve things, which is traumatic. And just grief in general is just really hard.
Yeah.
Right?
It really is. And it takes on, it's a whole different, monster. It just comes and goes in waves.
Yeah.
It's real challenging. There's no time limit.
No. I always say grief is like a roller coaster. You just have to just strap in with Jesus and just ride.
Yeah.
There are some times when it's easy breezy and you're doing life fine. And then all of a sudden you hit this loop and you're upside down and you're going backwards. And grief is, a riding of the waves, riding of the roller coaster. It is very much, you can't expect it to go a certain way. Right?
You can't. It's, you said it right. It's like you have to, I got this vision of you're on a surfboard and then you wreck, and then you're just being taken by the undertow and the waves, and you can't control that.
No.
If it wants to rake you against the reef or the bottom or throw you up again, you're at the mercy of the power of the wave. And I think basically that's really what's happening. You're at the mercy of the wave or the roller coaster of grief.
Yeah.
It's such a massive thing. But you hit it on the head. It needs to be with Jesus.
Yeah. And I love that you're kind of talking about that surfer dynamic. I think of whenever I watch surfing competitions or whatever, you always see the guy on the jet ski real close by to help pull the surfer who was at the mercy of all the waves. They're able to hold on to the back of that jet ski and be ridden to a safer spot.
Right.
And I think that that's the beauty of grieving with Jesus, and also with community and with help, counsel. Grieving alone is so detrimental.
Yeah.
There are times when we need to be alone in our grieving.
Yeah.
But grieving alone is so detrimental, because we just get at the mercy of those waves over and over and over and over and over again with no help to come out of it. And that's where despair, and we get stuck, hopelessness, helplessness, all of those things really get in.
Yeah.
And we kind of just get stuck in that.
Yeah. To be honest, I'm really new at being honest and real with grief. I would just pack things away and just keep, like, I would survive, hustle through the next thing and survive it and survive it and survive it and survive it until I was just overwhelmed and stressed to where it was taking physical effect on my body and my mental. I was just like, I had heard of grief, but I really didn't understand it. I really thought that like it wasn't affecting me, you know. Strangely enough, I don't know why I thought that, but it's because I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
I didn't know really what it was, and then I found out what it was, and I was, oh, that's what's wrong with me.
Yeah.
I'm a mess because I'm not getting on the roller coaster. You know what I'm saying? It's like I'm fighting trying to, like, you know, I'm not grabbing on to the jet. You know, I'm not buckling in. You know, I'm just trying to do all the wrong things with the grief, and then finally, like, man, I think we have lots of grief, not in a negative sense, but when there's a loss of something, of anything really, grief comes with that. But grief is a healthy process to healing.
Yeah.
It's not a negative thing, but I had a very negative of connotation on grief, like so much that I pushed it down and ran from. Can't really run from it, but didn't really want to deal with it. So I'm actually really new, only like 2 or 3 years in of just really knowing that, wow, you know. And then, you know, the only thing that I really knew of grief was my dad passing in 2020, and you walked me through a lot of that. But you know, it was like, whoa, how do I do? It was the first time I was really introduced to, hey, this is grief. And there's no getting around this. There's no, you got to just go with it. And then it opened up to, wow, I have a lot of grief from the trauma, the loss of childhood, with the addiction that we're talking about, like a loss of relationships, loss of life, loss of time. There's just so much grief that I was just kind of all in my face. And so it was just like, how in the world do I, like, deal with this? But I had the tools, and it's just like, I strap in with Jesus, you know, and we may have like non-believers on here, but you strap in, right? Or you flow with that. You're on, sometimes I'm surfing,
You get the help.
and then sometimes I get hit and I'm getting drugged, but grab onto that, you know, so.
Absolutely. So there's 16 kinds of grief.
Oof.
Right.
16.
And this is, and there might be more studies. This is the most I've found that is like in, but just listen to all these kinds. I love that you were saying like loss of this and loss of that. Like there are so many, because one, like when I read these, one of them can be like, oh, the loss of that was this kind of grief. The loss of that was that kind of grief. And so it's a whole thing. So here they are: normal grief, or just uncomplicated grief. Then there's complicated grief, or abnormal grief, traumatic grief, chronic grief, anticipatory grief, disenfranchised grief, distorted grief, exaggerated grief, masked grief, inhibited grief, collective grief, cumulative grief, prolonged grief, abbreviated grief, delayed grief, absent grief. And there's another one that I know of definitely that they've termed ambiguous grief, which might be maybe the disenfranchised, or even the masked, or anticipatory is probably the ambiguous, but just so much, right? So when we look at that, we can see that there's just so many layers to it, right? And so I know that we handle those things differently, because, you know, I think of like the ambiguous grief or the anticipatory grief of, I know for me, you know, recovering from an anxious attachment style, I have a lot of struggle with anticipatory grief. I anticipate the loss of loyalty, the loss of pursuit with romantic interests before it even happens.
Yeah.
Because of just environments that I've grown up in. And so, and just situations too in my adult dating life that have happened as well. And so there is, that. And so I deal with that very differently. Whereas I have, a loss of a loved one. Like I think of, a dear friend of mine who had taken her own life about 3 years ago. That is a different kind of grief. That's a loss of relationship. But it's one that I think where when you lose a person, you have a set point of time to refer back to. Oh, that's when I lost them, right? And so the grief, we grow around our grief. Our grief never goes away. We just grow around it, right? We learn to cope with it in a way that isn't dysfunctional and isn't dismissive, doesn't diminish the loss, but we embrace it in a way that we are able to have it be a part of our life. And it moves from traumatic to, there's just so many of those layers. So with, you deal with those differently, whereas the anticipatory or the exaggerated or the ambiguous or those type of griefs, it's kind of like a walking zombie. It's like, oh, that died last week, but now it's alive again. It's in my face wanting relationship again. And that's why I think, just kind of like as a sidebar, I think where inconsistency in relationships and friendships is so damaging, because people who do struggle with grief, every time the rug's pulled out of security in the relationship, of healthiness in the relationship, it dies again.
Yeah.
Right. And so then you're back and things are cool. Yay. Okay, the zombie lives. You know what I mean? Yeah. So and I think that, is really hard. But my point in that is we deal with the different kinds of griefs in very different ways. But if we don't know and we're just like, oh, I'm just sad, we're going to want to numb out that pain, cope with that pain in a maladaptive way, like we talked about with addictions.
Yeah.
Or just bottle it up, like you said, like towards like, I'm just going to deny. There's a whole grief stage, right?
Right.
Denial is a big one. And it's at the beginning stages of grief to where it's like, I'm not sad. I'm good.
Right. It's in our society, it's just like you survive it, you ignore so much. But in my recovery, not just through addiction, but in my recovery of life, it's just, I'm knowing that the body wasn't created in that to necessarily suppress. As we see, like when we cry, the body releases tears. Like if we get sick, the body gets rid of the poison, through the nose, through just so the body was created to get rid of the poison. But then like when we deal with like the mental things, like the body was created to release that stuff. And if we don't release it, then that stuff turns into poison, which can be a spiritual poison and a physical.
Yeah.
It can create a physical poison. And grief is so heavy. And hard and massive, and there's just like you said, there's 16 of them, and that alone is just like, I need to figure this out. I need to figure out like what I'm dealing with so that I can heal. Ignoring grief is, the body can only take so much ignoring. If you're ignoring your trauma, if you're ignoring your addictions, if you're ignoring grief, if you're ignoring everything, like you may think that you're ignoring it, but your body is actually going through the process of suppression and dealing with it, trying to get it out. And you're fighting your body as, no, I don't want to deal with it.
And it stores it.
Yeah. And it stores it. And then physical things start to happen in your body.
Yeah. And that's, I think, a big point to even wrap around kind of with what we were talking about with addictions is stored grief is traumatic to the body. And traumas feed addictions because addictions relieve the pain of the trauma for the moment temporarily.
Yeah.
And so a big part of even helping addiction healing is looking at what needs to be grieved.
Yeah, that's right. That's so huge that you just said that, because a lot of people, and when it's when people look at addiction, like outside people look at the taboo people, which is not true.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks about the things that we're talking about, right? That's the root system. When you look and you have that mercy and that grace for the person, like, these are the questions that can be asked. Like, what's there? Something is there. There's a lot there. Are you dealing with your trauma? Are you dealing with your grieving that's, leading to this, you're dealing with these things that help you deal with. It's all tied in together. And the more that you face it, the more that you deal with it, the more you grow, the stronger you get, the more you know how to use the tools that help you. And over time, you graduate and go level, precept upon precept, go level to level. And it's been very lucrative for me, like spiritually lucrative and mentally lucrative for me to actually embrace the grief and the loss in my life. And I don't know how to do that a lot of times, I just say, yes, okay, I'm open to discuss it and talk about it. That's a huge way. Acknowledging that, yes, there's grief here. I am hurting and I'm upset over this loss. But it's been so massive to deal with. Like, I don't have like this major grasp on grief, but I do know that I've stored a lot of it away. And I do know that I'm tired a lot.
Yeah.
I used to think that I was like so like lazy.
Grief is exhausting.
But like through my therapy, you had a conversation with me about it. Like, we don't realize how much energy it takes to, one, ignore the trauma, addiction, grief, all of those things. Or two, we don't realize that it takes so much energy. Like days when I was just like, man, I fell asleep at the wheel 5 times and I don't know what's wrong with me. Hey, bro, you're in massive recovery and healing from all of these things. And that takes energy to respond instead of react, to choose Christ over my poverty mindset, to have moments like we had today where I had to talk to you and tell you I'm freaking out about my finances. There's energy that takes, even what we're doing, having these conversations, it's good and we want to do that, but it takes that emotional energy, and that's tiring, right? So realizing, a lot of people don't think about that. A lot of people just think like physical work is how you get tired, but no, like the mental and the spiritual stuff is very taxing to the body. The body's more than just physical.
Absolutely.
So grieving, learning to pinpoint the grief, being honest. If you can't pinpoint it, but being honest with, I'm grieving this. Being able to see this. These are the things that I've lost. Because if you've lost, then there's grief tied to that.
Absolutely.
With anything, it doesn't matter.
Absolutely. And I think that even loss, we can lose the hope of something. We can lose a sense of something. We can lose an actual something. We can lose an actual someone. We can lose the hope of someone. And I think that even like so many times, I think of just like relationship, like you hoped, or even friendship, you hope for this friendship or this relationship to be so great and so fulfilling and so exciting, and it just derails.
Yeah.
And that is a grief because you lose the hope of what it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of that ambiguous grief. And so, whenever you look at those things, it is so vital to look at not storing it, but processing it. And I love that you said, like, just even acknowledging it's there is the first step of it.
Yeah.
So many times we just get confused at why we feel what we feel about the things we feel about them.
Right.
And just shove it away.
Yeah.
But stopping and saying, hey, what's there? And I need to process that through. And even if that just means crying it out and I have no clue why I'm crying, but my body's need to process something.
Yeah.
That's a allowance of self to be able to process what is needing to be processed.
Yeah.
And I think that even in that, I love that you had talked about tears earlier, because there's even different kinds of tears that we cry.
Yeah.
Like chemically, there have been research, I don't know where, so I'm not quoting it, but like I know that there's been research out there that chemically the makeup of grief tears versus joy tears are different underneath the microscope. And so the saltiness of it is different. The alkalinity of it, like all of that stuff is so different. Because our body chemically is doing stuff with our stress hormones, bonding hormones, those type of things that affect the chemical makeup of our body. And so when you're saying grief is a physical thing, it is so much. And it's our way of connecting with our body, with our mind, with our spirit, with our world around us, with God, with all of those things. But when we suppress grief, we shut ourselves off from our body, from our emotions, from our mind, and we project ourselves into this future version of ourselves that we want to be, which isn't who we are at the moment.
Yeah.
And so no wonder we're all walking around with, at moments of feeling out of body,
Right.
feeling not good enough, because we're always just trying to project into the who we want to be versus embracing who we are at the moment.
Right.
And allowing what needs to be processed.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. It's just being able to, it's not easy either. Being able to sit with that, with grief, acknowledging that there are issues there, right? Because it opens up. And, a lot of times there's that root system. See the root system.
We need a t-shirt.
Right.
Root system.
Kraken. who's simmering in the root system. Crockpot.
Let it simmer.
Yeah, it's and none of this is easy. But like you have to choose your pain. Is it the pain of growth, or is it just like the pain of just sitting in the ignorance of not wanting to deal with something? And stop looking at grief as your biggest enemy, more so your greatest friend.
Yeah.
We got to stop looking at these things as they're the enemy, because they're not. Grief is not the enemy. Grief wants to walk you through healing. But grief is very real and raw and showing you the truth.
Yeah.
So.
And there are opportunities.
Yeah.
To be able to connect.
Yeah.
In those spaces. And I think that, when we're not, I love that you said that of don't make it your biggest enemy.
Yeah.
But it can be a friend, and I just thought about like two instances, of grief for me was, when I was like 22, 23, I had a miscarriage, and it was very traumatic, and I didn't allow myself to grieve it because I just suppressed it so hard.
Yeah.
And I was already operating in a lot of trauma around that time. So it was just like, my brain was like, this is just too much. I just pushed that in the corner. And so I didn't really grieve that miscarriage until about 13 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I really was walking through that, probably about 4 to 5 years into grieving that miscarriage, that loss of that sweet baby, I had lost my dog, who was 12 years old, who I had gotten right after the miscarriage. So it was very connected for me. But I remember, my point in this is remembering when I went through my miscarriage, I was alone, laying on the floor in the bathroom with nobody to walk through that with me. But when I lost my dog, I was not able to be with her. I was in Florida on vacation. It was so horrible. I had to do it over video chat. It was ridiculous. But I remember very clearly my mom, I was on vacation with my family, and my mom was on the bed with me. I was just uncontrollably sobbing, and she was just right there with me, sobbing with me. And just there, the presence, her presence there with me. It was this connecting of, and I remember why I was so heavily grieving my dog was because I was also grieving my baby. Yeah. So that was tied in. I was losing my fur baby and so it was all tied in. And so I think that that's also something to understand about grief is they tie in because they're a part of us, right?
Yeah.
And so when we sit there and allow people into those moments and we don't suppress the grief, it helps to heal grief that we have already suppressed in the past. Because God doesn't let things just go isolated. He said, I'm going to work all things for your good, including using this as an opportunity to pull in more healing from other things.
Yeah.
And so it's such a journey of looking at it as when I lean into my grief and not suppress it, it can be a friend for me.
Yeah.
And so that's really powerful that you said that.
And I like the fact that you said that when your mom was there, nothing was said. She was just there. And she was feeling you and weeping with you in that moment. That's so powerful. We don't always have to try to fix people or say the right things, even though we want to. Just being there with somebody in that moment with them and letting them know, like, hey, like, I'm just here with you in this is so powerful and so amazing and so supportive.
Yeah.
And one thing is that I heard you say is that you suppressed the grief, and something was coming to me like, sometimes it's okay. There's no shame in that. Your body. Now, there is the suppression of fear because you don't want to deal with it. But there's also suppression of, I'm so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I cannot. And the body has a way of saying, whoa, overload, we're going to suppress this down. There's no shame in that. That's okay. That's like a natural thing. We don't want to like pack it away forever, but sometimes when you're in a healthier place, when, okay, it's time to deal with this now. And there's no timestamp on that. It could, years could go by.
Yeah.
It's a very slow process for me to deal with a lot of the loss in my life. But one of the things that I'm learning to do is to take it easy on myself and be okay with, sometimes I just don't have any feeling, but I still have to process through my defense mechanism of packing stuff down because I'm not going to have it all together. But if I'm willing to continually stay in acknowledgement, I want to acknowledge my grief, and certain things come up, and sometimes I'm like, I can't right now.
Yeah.
I can't handle this right now. And I don't have to handle it. And then there's other times when the right moment comes up to where I'm in therapy and I'm just saying, hey, you know, I've kind of been running from this week, this grief. And I talk about it with my therapist, or I'll talk about it with Jenna or my inner circle people, that my mentors are the people that I, you know, entrusted in that moment. But I just wanted to say, like, it's okay. That suppression, don't feel like if you suppress it, you're like this bad person, you know, and there's shame and condemnation. No, like, even if you do suppress it and don't want to deal with it, that's understandable because it's hard, but it's more detrimental to you if you don't deal with it. It's more crushing if you don't deal with it. But there's an understanding of, this is a hard thing. These subjects that we're talking about, grief it's a hard thing, but it's not there to hurt you.
No.
And to destroy your life. It's on the contrary, it's there to help you process through a very hurtful time. And you don't do it once.
No.
Right?
No, it is. It's in layers. We get sometimes traumatized in layers, and we heal in layers.
Yeah.
You know, and I love that you're saying that, because it is so true that sometimes there is even a need to put it on a shelf for a minute, you know. And I mean, a lot of the trauma work of healing and grief is a part of trauma. And grief itself is traumatic at times. But the first really phase of really truly healing with trauma is stabilization.
Yeah.
You know, really just being able to get stabilized in a place of even able to process it,
Right.
so that you don't just flood and stay in fight or flight. Because processing really is your prefrontal cortex that has to come online,
Right.
of your thinking brain. And if you're in fight or flight mode, which is stress response, which is fear response from the trauma, from the loss, you literally can't even process it. And that's why people go in shock sometimes, you know. Literally, your brain is like, nope, we don't need to think right now.
Right.
So when people are like, when something has happened and they're like, let's just talk through it, let's just talk. There's got to be some space and allowing, you know, where are you at? What are you ready to process is a big question.
Yeah.
What do you feel ready to talk about?
Yeah.
Like, that is a question I ask oftentimes with my clients is when we're talking about grief, what do you feel ready to talk about right now? Because then they are able to check in with themselves and say, okay, what is on the surface? What have I stabilized to the point that has allowed me to access this piece of the grief? And let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because grief is also not dealt with in one session.
Oh my gosh, no. There is, like I said before, there is no timestamp on grief at all. There's no timestamp really on any of the things that, you know, we talk about. Like, that was one of the hard things too, is just, you know, opening up to people. That's why you have to be wise with the people that you have to know your inner circle, and you need to be wise with your boundaries, and you need to be wise with who you give this precious treasure information to, because you don't want to give it to somebody who is just like, you've been dealing with this for 6 months. It's time to get over this. That is the worst thing. And so damaging, because don't you think?
Yeah, like, don't you think they want to?
You know what I'm saying? If it was a light switch, like all these things, don't you think that we would constantly keep it off and never flip it back on?
Or they say that to themselves.
Yeah.
I should be over this by now.
Yeah. So there's no like timestamp on grief. You know, I've been talking to tons of people about losing my dad, and all of them said, you never really get over that.
No.
You get better with it. That was so like, and that was the same thing about like learning about my addiction. It was like, you grow and get better with it.
Yeah.
It was heartful. It was like, it broke my heart to hear that. because I want it to be,
You don't want to deal with it.
you don't want to do, you want to go in, especially in our society, like it's a, microwave, my attention span is, I don't have, I want to scroll through it, like watch it for a couple seconds, boom, next. That is not how any of this works. Like, so being aware and being just like open to where you're at. I love what you were saying. Like, where are you at? Like, how are you, how are you wanting to process through this? Just showing up and taking what steps that you can. Because I promise you that, like, the more that you do this with your grief and the more that you take grief's hand, see, when you take the hand of grief is, and I know that we did make the imagery of the roller coaster and the wave, right? But I think that's more so like what grief is if you're trying to pull, if you're trying, the process can feel that way if you're trying to like ignore. And sometimes, but if you take the hand of grief, like if you say, grief, I can only take 2 steps today. Grief is like, okay. It's not like, no, we're walking for an hour. It's like, okay, that one step is that underneath the wave, you know what I'm saying? Being, and then when you take that one step, grief is like right there. Like, I know it's weird to say, but holding you.
Yeah, grief doesn't pressure us. We pressure grief.
Yeah. Oof. I don't think they understood that. Don't worry about it. You'll get it. Like, you start the journey. Yeah, that was massive right there. That was massive. Yeah.
I think that's, and I think even taking like a kind of a slight caveat of, if you've grown up in church, for you believers, how many times have we heard grieving the Holy Spirit? Right. And I think that, like, I never really understood that until I started digging into grief, because, God has so many dreams and visions for us.
Yeah.
God has desires for us. God has a plan for us. God longs for relationship with us.
Right.
And that intimacy. He literally sent his son to the cross and back and gave us Holy Spirit to walk along with as our comforter and our counselor and our advocate and our friend. And so that's relationship. So if we step outside of man's religion and look at just relationship, there's dreams and hopes and goals in that. And so when we walk in a way in life that hurts us and is dysfunctional and is chaotic and is toxic and steals from us and keeps us stuck and keeps us hurting more and more and more, what the Holy Spirit's grieving is the loss of freedom that Jesus provided for us to begin with.
Right.
And so it's like, I don't know, it's like a prisoner who's been set free and just continues to live on the prison grounds.
Right.
As a jailmate resident, but isn't truly incarcerated. Like, it's just, there's loss of freedom there.
Yeah.
It's like you have been set free. Go live freely.
Yeah.
But we stay so close to the comforts of our captivity.
Wow, that's really...
that we fear learning to deal with the uncomfortability of freedom.
Yeah. Choosing your pain.
Yeah.
That's so massive that you said that. And that imagery is so crazy. Like, so many people are free, but they're still living in the prison.
Yeah.
Because it's all they know, and that's their trauma bonding. That's all they know. And so that's like the relationship. That's why the relationship is needed. That's why the community is needed to help walk through together and know and truly understanding through this, and I think like everything ties in, like, of just everything that we talk about being aware, having mentors, having accountability, like, being honest with things, bringing things into the light. Like it's just all of this combinations, and it's biblical, and it's beyond even before the Bible was written. It was beyond its life. It's how God created. It's the creation. It's what's all around us. Animals grieve.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Talking about the loss of my,
you know what I'm saying? Like
Nikita, I have had 2 dogs, for like 13, like 10, 11, 12 years. However, Nikita's 10. And Maya was 12 when she passed, and that was 2 years ago. So anyway, they've been buddies. Like I got them when I got Nikita, Maya was 3 years old. And so Nikita and her have been together for a good solid 8 to 10 years, roughly. The math. But buddies, sisters, buddies. So when Maya passed, for about 2.5 to 3 months, Nikita mourned.
Yeah.
She was, Nikita, she's bouncy, bubbly, fun girl. But she was depressed. She laid around. She lost weight. She barely ate. Like there was so much of that. And that was the first time I really understood how an animal can grieve.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my gosh, they experienced the loss of that bond.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. And you see it like documentaries of, dolphins and whales and
everything.
geese. I heard a goose.
Like, this is creation, right? This is creation. This is like, we got to truly understand, like, this stuff is real talk, real stuff. But I think like, just in having these conversations, because that's what Love Speak is, right? Jenna and I, for several years, would just have these conversations to just talk about things, to share on a depth as believers, and sometimes having these conversations with non-believers. And so we want to. That's why we're talking about these things, because we know about the other side. We've been through it, right? We've been through the ignoring.
Yeah.
We've been through the running. We've been through all of that as Christians. But then we've also been through the facing the trauma head on and deciding and all of these things, to know that the quality of life that comes out of, maybe not necessarily easy a lot of times, but to know that we now have tools, and to know that there is a quality of life on the other side of this. So that's why we're here, to just have conversation, right? And definitely wanting to hear back from you all. What do you think? How do you feel? What do you think about this? What is your viewpoint on this? How has your walk been? And because we can learn from you all as well, like in the different journeys and everything. So, but grief in the series of what we're talking about is so massive. Like, because if you don't embrace grief, then you can't really heal from the trauma and deal with addiction. Yeah. It's just not gonna, and vice versa. Like when if you're not dealing with the trauma,
it'll bring more grief.
It'll bring more grief.
Yeah. And I think too, like I was just sitting here thinking, like, I'm reminded of old days, right? And even cultures where they have, like, whenever they lose someone, they have a period of mourning. They have a dedicated time of however many weeks or months or a year of mourning, whatever culture and time era that was. But they had a dedicated time of mourning, and they had a mourning, I forget what the name is, but they had a mourning wardrobe, like what they wore. They were in mourning. They wore black, or they wore, which is interesting that we're both in black. But they had the protocol societally for mourning to allow space, give them time to just expect that they're in mourning. So whatever comes with that, is a part of their grief. So it's a societal expectation that they're going to be not as engaged in society because they are mourning the loss of whatever.
Yeah.
And they're even to the level where they don't have to even think about what they're going to wear.
Yeah.
They just go and wear black.
Yeah.
Right? They don't have to worry about the things of being present in society because they've just lost something very near and dear.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's just massive, because I think as Americans, we just live in this grinded out, push and strive, egocentric way of living, that keeping up with the Joneses and comparing and being better and highlight reels and all these things of like, to even think of, oh, for me to withdraw from the societal norms that is expected of me because of normal day living, and to just pull back and have my inner circle and have the help I need, and to be okay with just a time of mourning, that's like unheard of. And people feel so guilty when they want to do that. But that's what they want to do because it's what they need.
Yeah.
And so I think that we've just got to do better.
Yeah.
We've got to do better when it comes to grief, because we're saying, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to take that time for you and focus on you and just grieve.
Yeah.
So keep pushing, keep showing up, keep doing. And then we complain about the addictions and the trauma responses that come from that as a perpetual ramification.
Yeah. Yeah. Even biblically, we see that with the ashes and sackcloth.
Yeah. Yeah.
How they would just pour ashes and just wear sackcloth. And that's so, I'm glad that you said that, because like, even like there are a lot of cultures that do take the time for mourning, like, for some are several weeks.
Yeah.
And I think like in our society, like that push, keeping up with the Joneses, keep it going. Don't show weakness. Don't show them. No, that's just, and we're seeing, we see the results of our equations, the society's equations, with the lack of truth in who we are as created beings, and our emotions and our feelings, which are very important in learning how to process, dealing with, emotionally and spiritually, getting rid of the body, trying to get rid of these things to live quality, to get rid of the poison, like as we've been saying. So grief is massive. And understanding grief is another issue. Misrepresenting grief, misunderstanding grief to be your enemy, and that's not what grief is at all.
Or a weakness.
Or a weakness, right.
And, those different cultures that we were talking about a second ago, like they grieve in community as well. Like they communally grieve, where there's multiple people crying with and walking with, funeral processions. We have 2-day max funeral for people we've lost. We have the wake and then we have the funeral. And that's pretty much over a span of like 2 days. And then everybody goes back to normal life.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's often that people struggle the most after the funeral, after everybody's gone back. That's when they struggle the most, because then they're alone.
Yeah.
Like, how amazing would it be for us to say, hey, loved one, come and live with me for a month.
Yeah.
After you've lost someone.
Yeah.
And let me just help you and let me give you that space to grieve, and you just be taken care of. And we'll ease you back into normal life, instead of like, oh, it's good to see you for the weekend. So, sorry on such, how many times have we heard like, oh, it's good to see family, but on such horrible, circumstances. Okay, so let's keep community together. Let's keep family together. Let's keep friendships together around that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where it will also help us shift and not misrepresent grief as something that's an inconvenience.
Yeah, the disrespect of grief too. Like you're saying, like the 2 funerals, the 2-day, and then, I'm just kind of thinking about my mom, losing my dad 57 years. And, she made a choice to move, but in that, was treated that way, kind of like, all right, here we go. It's,
Back to normal.
back to normal,
Yeah.
or just trying to figure it out, instead of like being in a space of where there was a surrounding, and there was love and support and patience
Yeah. That's
and
big.
being seen, and that's that's what we want. That's what we need going through all of this, especially in this series. It's important to have, because we talked about um, we talked about friendship and community. And see, all of these things tie into each other. You don't have one without the other.
Yep.
Everything that we talk about is tying in with quality and recovery and healing and growth. So yeah, this was a good one. I really liked. And like I said, I'm new at the grief. But I'm learning, because, I was the first one to think that grief was an enemy. And that's why I was just like, nope.
Yeah.
But then when my dad passed, I couldn't run.
Right.
There was like it shut my whole,
Yeah.
I changed. I wasn't the same. I haven't been the same man, but it shut my life down.
Yeah.
And then I had to face it. So in a way that it was good. And then I started learning to put, knowing that grief is a friend, and I'm not so terrified of grief anymore.
That's
and
good.
it's easy to go. And we encourage you all to, please know that it's not a shameful thing to deal with all of these things, and be honest with all of these things, and to face all of these things. And you're not alone, and there is hope.
Yeah. There's groups, there's support, there's counsel.
Yeah.
Reach out. Yes, take that time alone for grief, but we won't grieve well alone.
Yeah. Well, that wraps the series. We hope that you got a lot out of this. We care for you, and we see you where you're at, and we love you in that space of where you're at.
Yeah.
Believer and non-believer, we love you.
Yeah.
So,
and just a reminder, this has been that heavy series, right? Trauma, addiction, grief. I think this is where we struggle to feel like we don't have it together. So why would Jesus love me?
Right.
I have to get it together for Jesus to be accepting of me. Romans, just a quick verse, real quick. Romans talks about how God demonstrated his love for you.
Yeah.
Is that while you were yet sinners, while you were yet in your deepest need for a rescue, that's when he sent Jesus to die on the cross for you.
Yeah.
And to provide salvation, and to provide that love bridge, relationally intimate relationship. Into you he sees.
Yeah.
It's intimacy. Into me I see.
Yeah.
So just a loving reminder, you don't have to have it together.
Yep.
It's why we're here. It's why we're chatting. But yeah, we hope that, like Sharif said, that you've got some nuggets from this. We are praying for you, especially over this series, for sure. And just share, subscribe, follow, all the good things, social media wise, just to help get some of those nuggets of truth out to your friends and family who might need them.
Yep. Well, we love you, and we see you.
Yeah.
I am Sharif Aman.
I'm Jenna Barbosa.
This is Love Speak Revolution.
Love meets you where you're at.
We'll see you soon.
Bye, guys.